All right, everybody. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I think I'm getting started 1 minute ahead of schedule, but that's okay. Lessons from IKEA's 100% electric last mile delivery. So I'm joined here today by Jimmy with Fluid Truck and Steve with IKEA Group. We're going to get into about 3 sections in this chat. I want to start with some background just to familiarize everybody with kind of what your delivery model is and how we're going to integrate electric vehicles into it. So I'll let them do intros on their companies and kind of how those work. Then I really want to get into the project details, like how many trucks do you have on the road? Where are they going? Were the pain points and the learnings you had from that early deployment? And then lastly, I just want to kind of wrap up with like what's next. Do you guys have it? What's on the horizon for this partnership or other collaborations or expansions of the project? So with that, I will kick it over to Steve first. If you could introduce yourself, and I think we all know IKEA, but maybe you could tell us something about IKEA that we don't know.
Sure. So I'm Stephen Mulk. I am the project implementation manager for IKEA's zero emission delivery ambitions in the United States. And that's part of a larger global goal to provide all our customers with zero emission home deliveries by 2025. So really right around the corner. It's an ambitious goal because IKEA, like a lot of companies, doesn't own its own vehicles. And so that becomes that becomes one of the primary challenges of electrification. Like, how do you electrify vehicles you technically have no control over? So I think that's that's what we're going to talk about today. But that's one of our primary challenges going into this.
Great. And for quick background, Stephen, how many say big distribution hubs are across the country, or do you have like a number of like how many trucks are out there on the road with IKEA badges on them?
Okay, so well, with IKEA badges, not very many, because because that there's up to this point, we have been we like a lot of companies, we outsource our logistics to third-party carriers, and those third-party carriers in turn use contractors to perform those deliveries, and the contractors bring their own vehicles typically to bear to do those deliveries, and so those vehicles are usually not badged at all. To perform the deliveries. As far as distribution hubs, we have I think 7 customer distribution facilities around the country, which is not nearly enough to actually cover final mile. We do some distribution from our storefronts, and we also use third-party logistics hubs. So third-party warehouses, these same logistics carriers, and we ship goods into their hubs where our product is commingled and then distributed from there. So it sounds complicated, but it's very typical in this industry to use third-party logistics carriers and then contractors and those third-party warehouses to kind of maximize your delivery footprint. In terms of scale of trucks, we probably on any given day maybe have 600-700 trucks tooling around the United States.
Great. Those are numbers that I did not know before now. So thank you. Jimmy, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about Fluid Truck so we can understand how this partnership came into being.
Sure. Hey, I'm Jimmy Berhard. I'm the founder and CEO of Fluid Truck. Fluid Truck is a technology platform that really is allowing fleets to be able to expand their fleets, get the right vehicle for the right job using their mobile phone or through our website. But we kind of look at, we're a network of trucks. We operate in 54 markets across the U.S. and every market will have hundreds of vehicles that as a business you can hop on the app, book the truck, and be out on the road in a matter of a couple minutes. And so we primarily work with businesses that are out there, really trying to prescribe to what they need from their fleet to go out there and get the job done. And so we handle everything from the booking of the vehicle, the asset itself. Then we'll have telematics, the maintenance, the fleet management, the insurance, and all the components that you need to be able to go out there and grab a vehicle and put to use. So that's a little bit of Fluid. We're a relatively new company, started up in 2016, and we're quickly expanding.
Yeah, very quickly. So a couple of questions. You mentioned, thousands of vehicles out there on the road. Like, about how many of those now would you say are electrified, and what percent are you trying to move towards in your overall fleet?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot smaller than we'd like. As we kind of look at the makeup of EVs today, it's well under 1%. It's quickly something we're ramping up. We've had commercial EVs on the road here for 19 months now in the U.S. But it's somewhere where we want to see that number quickly get to 50% of the vehicles in our fleet are electric, and we're now starting to really see vehicles that can go out there and are getting past a lot of the first generation challenges, and seeing vehicles that are starting to get deeper on range, get deeper on the payload. It's exciting to kind of see where it's at today. But there's a lot of work to be done on the electrification side. And I think some of the early challenges are just the vehicle itself. Just like any new technology, there's always the first generation teething problems out there. But with all the OEMs really making a concerted effort to drive electrification, you're seeing a lot of states, a lot of companies like IKEA that's one of the first ones out there with the vision to go say, hey, we want to see 100% electrification of our last mile by 2025. We're starting to see more companies take that same approach, and it's exciting to see, because it's something that can be pretty impactful for the overall environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to recap sort of what I heard, just so the folks in the audience can start to see how this all comes together, which is that IKEA contracts with a TSP. The TSP also then has its own subcontractors, and then those subcontractors are the ones that go out and become customers of Fluid Truck, right? That's kind of how this whole thing maps together. I'd be interested in hearing from either one of you sort of what were some initial discussions happening with these TSPs. I think, Stephen, I remember years ago calling you and asking you about IKEA's plans, and you mentioned having written electrification into RFPs, but not having a lot of providers who could bring it to the table for you.
Right. So, I mean, I think that's, if you're the big and bulky space in particular, and actually the parcel space as well, although maybe not as noticeable, are really dominated by these contractors. Despite what you might see painted on the side of the truck, most of these trucks that are tooling around today are contractors, and so and they're contracts for a number of reasons. Some are legal and some are growth related or capital related, but the third party logistics providers are usually these kind of in this asset light model. So they don't want to own trucks. They don't want to maintain trucks. They have no real ability to do that. They have no facilities to do that. They have no people to maintain these trucks and buy trucks and come up with the capital to purchase these trucks. So as a result, they're really not in this trucking business. So my first conversations with our TSPs, I think everybody is really supportive of the goal, and they understand. Anybody who's worked with IKEA long enough understands our commitment to sustainability, but the practicalities of how that actually happens, I think, was the question mark. Like, that's great. How do we do this? We could go out and try to convince some of the contractors to purchase one of these trucks, but realistically, these contractors are exactly what they say they are. They're contractors. They could work for one company one day and another company for another day. And if they purchase an EV truck, where are they going to charge, and how do you get over the hurdle of the expense and things like this. And so I think those are the primary challenges. So having a kind of a third party own the vehicles and maintain the vehicles and things like this was really the solution here. Like I said, the contractors themselves are not going to do it until EVs are completely prevalent in the marketplace. And so we just needed another way to get those folks access to electric vehicles without asking them to mortgage the farm and stuff like this in order to get into them.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think on that, like it's something where we watched, especially through COVID, the consumer behavior dramatically changed. And it was always, it's always starting to make this morph where instead of going to the store, you're buying stuff on your phone, having it delivered to your door. And so within that transformation, how's your brand show up to the consumer's house? And so, like in the case of IKEA, like I mean, not having control over the drive or what vehicle they're going to use, having a 10-year-old diesel truck that puts out a big black cloud of smoke, isn't the type of brand presence that IKEA wants to have. And being able to mandate, we want a vehicle that's not dented up, that's not beat to hell, and that's not putting out carbon or putting out a black cloud of smoke. Be able to mandate that so you have a high quality, good looking vehicle that carries the same brand essence that if you show up to an IKEA store, you're going to have a similar experience. And so I think that kind of a look here as we're watching consumer behavior and watching e-commerce and last mile delivery become ever bigger part of our life, and it was accelerated pretty heavily through COVID. Is a key function of it. And so as we kind of look at we take the asset and we make it accessible to any of the contractors, so they can go to the depot, grab the vehicle at the depot through our platform, and then go out there, deliver that route. And in some cases, we'll have people that are doing very short routes of like 2, 3, 4 hours, and then other people that would be grabbing it for a week at a time. But having two people be able to exchange and be able to drive 2 different routes with the same vehicle across the day is kind of one of those things that we enable, which allows less vehicles to be on the road, less vehicles to be out there producing carbon or waste, and then at the same time, being able to have that mandated safe vehicle that's inspected, maintained professionally through our platform, allows the ability to go out there and scale and mandate the type of vehicle that you're going to have out on the road, deliver the package.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point that you made, because I think all of us on this panel, we're all truck people. We think about trucks a lot. And now it's an interesting time when the actual end user consumer is now like coming out of their front door, facing a truck. They have questions about it. They wonder about it. So now suddenly truck people have an extra bit of work to do.
For sure.
I'm interested in hearing also a little bit more about the fluid model, what exactly altogether you're providing your customers. So I'm guessing, but you can correct me, tell me, where are they charging? Do they charge at your depot, or are you installing chargers for their somewhere else? Do they pay for their fuel, or is it included in their rate?
So, I mean, all that's included into the rate. So it's something where the charging, right now we're still in those early days of the charging infrastructure for commercial vehicles isn't really heavily out there. So, I mean, in the case of like IKEA, they'll have charging at their stores or charging at their depots, but we also then have third-party lots. We'll have our own lots that we'll install charging equipment at. And so that way they'll grab it. But really what we're trying to do is create this experience where as a delivery driver, you take an Uber, you ride your bike, you drive your own personal car to the depot, you check out the vehicle, load it up, and go out and run the route. And making it so it's the lowest impact mechanism to be able to have the access to the vehicle and accomplish the job.
Right. I mean, I think that when you look at the contractor model and these guys being able to have someday, eventually, their own vehicles, they'll bring their own electric vehicles, but you really have to have charging infrastructure in as many places as possible. So, to answer your question, like Jimmy said, we're charging at IKEA today. We're also charging at the Fluid headquarters today in Denver, and we're charging, I'll take charging wherever we can find it. So if our TSPs want to install charging at their facilities, that sounds great. We're happy to utilize those vehicles or facilitate the staging of Fluid rental EVs at their locations. We could do that too. So, or if there are public charging opportunities, and we're talking to a couple of different folks about, these places for these vehicles to domicile on third-party properties. So, if there was parking spaces to be, rented on a monthly basis or something like this that had charging included in that, then maybe that's something that we could take a look at. So, there's no hard and fast rule there on where the charging infrastructure should go. I personally think it should go in as many places as possible to kind of facilitate that. But yeah, right now it's mostly at our depots.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's something that I think a lot about too. I work here at CalSTAR on the incentives that the state of California offers for these vehicles and these chargers. And so often, I think all of us are harmonizing our voices and saying, make the charging funding and support less restrictive rather than more restrictive to allow for more mix and match options, because you're right, it just needs to be everywhere, right?
That's right. I mean, you can't have vehicles tied to chargers. Some of the incentives, I guess some of the early incentives had vehicle to charger ratios and things like this as part of the agreement, and that makes no sense at all. But so you just need to have as many chargers, as many opportunities to charge as possible. I also think there are many different use cases. In our case, we're delivering between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. in most markets, and so fast charging doesn't necessarily have to be the only answer here, because the vehicles still need a place to park, still need a place to domicile, and the contractors themselves, when they're finished with a route, they just want to plug the vehicle in and they're going to go home, right? They don't want to wait an hour or two and then move the vehicle and stuff like this. And so fast charging is great and totally supportive of public fast charging, but I don't think it's the only use case out there. There is definitely a case to be had for publicly accessible parking with charging.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the push for, I just want to pull my truck into a diesel station and just have a fueling experience that's analogous. It is some thinking that we have to overcome. And we're going to get to this because I think Jimmy said that there were some pain points with some of the drivers and trying to get them into this sort of new model of thinking about charging. But I do want to recognize that there's a question in the chat from Christine. She's interested in knowing about IKEA's influence on the actual vehicles that are getting used. So I guess there's probably two parts to that question. She might be interested in hearing about how you get your subcontractors to use electric vehicles from Fluid instead of just any diesel vehicle that maybe Fluid offers. But I also have a follow-on question, which is, how much interaction do you have on selecting vehicle make, model, who's the manufacturer, and those types of specs? Or is that all in Fluid's court and Jimmy just picks the right vehicles for the right market?
Well, it's a lot of questions there. I think that the way that we deal with the contractors is nobody is forced to use the Fluid vehicles. They're available for rent by the contractors. What we are saying is that we do have a goal. It's to provide zero emission home delivery. So conceptually, a contractor, if they wanted to make their own investment or found a different way to gain access to an electric vehicle, leasing it or buying it or however they want to do it, they could do that, right? There are some other TSPs in other places that finance and purchase their own electric vehicles, and that's cool. So, but our model here is really I like to call it a bowling alley. You can come to the bowling alley with your own shoes if you want to, but if you don't have your shoes, you can rent them from the alley. They're available, but nobody's forcing people to do it. But we are saying that if you want to do deliveries for IKEA, you are going to have to use a zero emission vehicle. When it gets proven out, then that's going to be part of our delivery contract with our TSPs.
I would say, in this early time, we're testing out, everybody, and we're trying to find the right vehicles. Different TSPs have different needs. There's different things on each route that they may need different requirements. Depending on weather conditions and seasonality and snow, there's different requirements that are needed for the vehicle. So I don't think that there's a silver bullet across the vehicle, and especially in these early days, we want to have a wide variety, a lot of different options out there. So we work with just about every manufacturer out there to bring the vehicles in, test them to the TSPs, understand what the TSPs want and need, and then try to match the right vehicle for the right job.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to get a little bit more background on the specific project you have going in New York. Let's start out with the basics. When did you ramp it up? How many trucks and chargers are out there, and how is it going? I'll start with Jimmy.
Okay.
Well, no, I think Steve, you take that one away.
No, I mean, look, we've got, at the moment, we're servicing New York City out of our Staten Island distribution center. And it has 44 level 2 chargers out there. And we did have there was a fire at our warehouse a month or so ago, 6 weeks ago, which did set us back a little bit, but we're ramping up again now as fast as we can. And so, I think as of today, we had 15 vehicles or so out there. I mean, that's a bit of a guess, but approximately. But the goal there is to get up to about 35 or 40 vehicles to really cover all of New York City. So we are in the re-ramp phase, and we've gone, like we mentioned, we've had a couple, first generation bugs to work out, and some growing pains there. But the trucks have been worked on, and we've brought in other trucks as well, and so we're trying to experiment and find the best truck for the use case there. So I think I think we're on a good track to now ramp up. Maybe by the end of the summer, we can be 100% in New York. So I'm optimistic that we've got a good shot at New York this summer.
Yeah, I think, and just we started, I think the first deployment was in December of 20. It's when the first vehicle started going out. That's right.
And it took a little while. I mean, look, there's a learning curve for the drivers. There's a learning curve for the vehicles themselves, and interoperability with the chargers, and all of these other things that can go wrong. So, and of course, the dispatchers themselves trying to make sure that the routes fit within the kind of the range constraints of the vehicle and that kind of thing. So there's a lot to it, but I'm glad we deployed when we did, because I think we've kind of gotten over a lot of those hurdles already.
Yeah, I think definitely on some of the first use cases where you have the drivers that get behind the wheel and they drive it like a diesel truck, where they're going gas to brake. And I mean, regenerative braking is a big function on extending range. And so in the very early days, they hop on and drive it gas to brake, where you need to drive gas and then pull off and then let that regenerative braking slow you down. Yeah. And just, some of those early learning lessons, or, ensuring that they plug the vehicle in after they're done and it goes all the way in, and allowing that to trigger notifications, and having backup systems there for, in the event it doesn't get plugged all the way in, and then you don't have a vehicle that's charged up for the next use on it.
I'm laughing because I made all these rookie mistakes with my first EV, right? Like letting my car get run down really fast because I wasn't driving properly. So how did you approach that issue, Jimmy? Like, do you host the drivers to take a training? Do you have a manual that they need to read before they can get in one? Or how do you get them sort of schooled up on the nuances of driving electric trucks?
I mean, a lot of it was, in the early days, it was trial and error, and like looking at the problems, looking at the data, and then trying to follow back up with the drivers directly on ways they can do it. I mean, we've created videos about how to use the vehicles, how to go about doing it. There are educational sources on it. But a lot of it comes into, there's been training courses that have been done directly with the drivers themselves. Here's do's and do nots. But a lot of those are some of those early things are like, still to this day, like I really think about you need to make that migration from the gas to not brake unless you have to brake scenarios. And so on that, it's things that, in these early cycles, those training components and just educational things are pretty important out there. But, showing the charge of the vehicle inside the application, so you can see how much juice does this have, And then we also then have scoring mechanisms to score the drivers on how they're driving. That give tips inside the applications. So I mean, there's no silver bullet on it, but there's a number of different mechanisms to say, this is how you go about doing it, as well as monitoring the vehicle for when it gets returned back. Is it actually being charged or not?
Yeah, that's a really good takeaway for those of you in the audience who are thinking about fleet transitions. Here's some things you might not have thought about. You got to get those drivers trained, and you need some smart charging apps to make sure the plug got plugged all the way in.
Right.
We've got another question from the audience, which is how has cold weather impacted your range, and what lessons learned do you have from that?
Oh, it impacts the range. I mean, there's no question about it. I think that you'll see you might see a 20% degradation of just the range, just because it's cold outside, and you might see another 20% degradation because the guys are running the heat, which they should run the heat, right? So you could see a significant degradation in cold weather operations. There's some things that you can do to kind of mitigate that. You can warm the truck before the driver gets in. You can use seat warmers instead of the cab warmers. You could use, you could use vehicles with larger batteries. I mean, that's always a different option. So, but all of those things, you have to kind of weigh all those different factors. And I think that when the dispatchers are putting together the routes and considering the routes, that this is one more factor that they're going to have to consider, is that during cold weather operations, you're just not going to get as many stops on board that truck on a given day. So it's just something to accommodate.
Yeah, no, and I think it's, as we kind of look at new companies that we're working with to try to help them electrify. I mean, it's part of, we're looking at the routes, what the use cases are, trying to design what they need from a charging solution. Whether that be, you need just all level 2s, you need level 2s and level 3s. And depending on the number of routes that you're going on per day, the number of times you're coming back to the depot to fill up, all those components, but really looking at range, weather temperature, time of year, because, in the summertime, pretty much everywhere in the U.S. you're going to have, a good user behavior or a good user experience. But when it comes to, January and February, when it's, cold, you can see some giant degradations in the battery. And I think, not all the manufacturers are equal in there. I mean, you see some that have done a much better job in their thermal management, which is important when you look at that. Do you lose 20%? Do you lose 30? Do you lose 40? Do you lose 50? And so it's in those kind of first generations where not all those things have been solved out, but some of the OEMs are doing better than other ones, but they'll eventually get there.
It does sound like another key takeaway for folks that are fleet managers in the audience is that we talked a little bit about driver training, but it also sounds like there's dispatcher training, right? Like the dispatchers have to really understand what's on the road and what truck is traveling which routes.
Yep. No, for sure. I mean, I think the dispatcher kind of set the expectation for the drivers. So they say, well, here's, 20 stops or whatever to do today. But, they have to take into account the range of the vehicle. What vehicle are they driving today, and does it have the range to complete the route? And then how much of if the driver drives on the highway, they're going to burn off a lot more of that battery than if they drove through a neighborhood, for example. So the and the drivers know this too, and so they kind of route themselves as well. So if they can go through, unlike it's just the opposite of like an ICE vehicle. If you go through stoplights and neighborhoods and things like this, you're going to use less of the battery per mile than you would if you're driving 60 miles an hour on a highway. So if you can do stops along the way and then stops on the way back or something like this, that's preferential to going out on a highway, doing stops, than driving back on a highway. So I think there are just different ways to approach the dispatching. The guys just have to get used to it. I mean, I think we talk a lot about the human learning curve, and it's true, it exists. But I think it's to Jimmy's point, I think there's a lot of trying to find out which vehicles are better than others, and which OEMs perform better under what conditions, and what vehicle mix you really need to have to support the fleet.
No, I think it's, as we've kind of looked through this, I mean, not having the infrastructure everywhere with chargers means that you got to plan. And I think as we kind of look at any company that's looking to go through electrification, it's looking at what their goals are, and then trying to look at their routes, trying to look at what they need, and then working backwards on, okay, you need to have this type of charging here. These are the type of vehicles that you should have. And based off the type of vehicles how you're going to use them, what the weather conditions are like, we'll make the determination on what your charging will look like, what your vehicles will look like. And you really got to design it. And it's not like this where you go out there, we're just going to go buy this box truck and go out and start using it day one. It does take a level of sophistication and a plan to go out there to make that migration to go all electric. Once you're there, I mean, you no longer stop at gas stations. You're actively grabbing the vehicle and using it. And there's all kinds of time savings, maintenance savings that come along with it. But it's ultimately, you've got to start with, where do we need to be? How are we going to get there? And that in some jurisdictions, I mean, you may be waiting 18 months for power. And so it really is making sure that you have that kind of focused plan for how do you get to, electrified.
It looks like we've got a couple of charging questions in the Q&A from Eleanor. She's asking, is IKEA testing kind of this process for getting your depot chargers installed? Was that first installation in New York done in partnership with your landlord or with the OEM, or was it something that Fluid took care of entirely? What does that look like? And then she followed it on with the question of, do you guys ever see automated chargers in the horizon?
Look, I love automated chargers. I wish I had an automated charger for my own EV, and they have them. They have the inductive charging, things like this, which I think is really cool technology. But until that point, until it gets everywhere, the problem with inductive charging is that, initially it may be a little bit more expensive today, but also you need, we're still trying out all these different OEMs, and you can't have them all have inductive charging necessarily. It just reduces the number of OEMs you're testing out. But yes, that's automated charging today. In Staten Island, IKEA installed those chargers, and of course we received permission from our landlord to install those chargers. So that's what we did. But again, that's not the only model out there. If Fluid wanted to install chargers, or our TSPs wanted to install chargers, that would be fine with us, or a third party.
Yeah. No, and I think on there, it's kind of the first opening steps that we work with partners on, that will go out there and say, okay, what do you need? And we'll make recommendations based off the chargers that need to go there. And even on that, we'll facilitate install the chargers, or look for other lots that we can pick up that are in a convenient set to be used, that either have existing charging or that we can go out there and upfit for that charging. But I mean, going through the permission, the permitting, the power upgrades, if that needs to be, I think it's absolutely the first step that you've got to go through. But go into what the routes look like, what you're driving every day, the number of stops and number of usages across the day. And, I think in these early days, you can't plan on having a gas station or electric charging station everywhere you go. So it's somewhere where you've got to look at that as a fundamental piece on how big of a battery, how long you're going to be able to go on a route.
Thanks. We have another question, which is actually in line with something I'm curious about, being a manager of state incentives. We sometimes talk to cities who are really interested in attracting projects like this one that you guys did in New York. And I think that we always want to know, how is your selection process? How do you pick your next project? What would make incentives more ideal, or what part of the ecosystem is most important when you guys are selecting to kick up a project like this?
I think on the incentive side out there, we don't think we've received a single incentive. We have to actually receive a single incentive for any of the electrification stuff we've done today. I think we have one that's coming, but we still haven't seen it. So I would say that we're kind of more focused about figuring out all the problems and all the bugs so we can scale it effectively. We'd love to see those incentives be really accessible. If you kind of look at like some of the voucher programs in California, I mean, those get got burned out, within minutes of being out there and offered. The first generation of them went out to just a handful of companies, that a lot of vehicles never got delivered. So, I think on our side, we'd love to see those come into play, but I think it's not the first thing that we're thinking about, because we're more about, what are all the problems? How do we solve those so it can effectively scale, going forward?
I think it's tough to take advantage of incentives. Like Jimmy said, the California voucher program is oversubscribed in seconds, and then you've got other voucher programs which like require scrappage, and then nobody touches those, right? Because we don't have vehicles to actually scrap. So they run on almost two extremes on the vehicle side, and on the infrastructure side, which is more dealing with the kind of stuff that I deal with. Yes, we are participating in a couple make-ready programs around the country, but even those become difficult for me because, IKEA is a furniture store, and we're not in the business of going after these incentives. And when we have 50 stores across the United States, which means you're dealing with 50 different utilities and 30 different states and different municipalities and stuff like this. And when you get all these different types of incentives, all of them come with legal paperwork, and then I've got to get that through my legal department, and I've got to get people to sign off on it, and sometimes they come with reporting requirements, and who's going to follow up with all of this stuff? You need a department of people just to fill out the paperwork and keep up with it. So if there was a way, I guess the question is like, how do you attract projects like this? Is I think first of all, incentives need to consider other use cases besides just fast charging, just corridor charging, just over the road charging, and just depot charging. Like, you have to think about, the contractors, which make up like 86% of the vehicles, of the commercial vehicles on the road today. How do you get charging to those folks? How do you get charging EVs to folks that can't afford EVs today? How do you support residual values? How do you get rid of the scrappage requirements so that you're not taking away their safety net the moment they get involved in a vehicle incentive? How do you get rid of the paperwork and harmonize the paperwork so that when you fill out one form, it applies to multiple different incentives or multiple different utility incentives, instead of having to fill out different paperwork each time and different legal language each time? Is like, it's tedious, and it's tedious for a big company like IKEA. So I can imagine if you're a smaller company, it becomes even more onerous to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. You're speaking my language here with
No, I love all the programs. I do. I don't want to sound like a stick in the mud here when it comes to these incentive programs, because I do think incentives are great and we need them, and very supportive of them. But when you look at where the incentives at the end of the day go, they go to big private fleets that own a lot of these vehicles. If you're trying to really have more of a reach with that, then you have to be thinking about other use cases besides just private fleets and depot charging.
Yeah, especially if you start looking at like the Fortune 500 companies that are getting those vouchers. Those Fortune 500 are typically driving much newer vehicles. It's the independent contractors that are an operator owner that drives one truck, that they're driving a 20-year-old diesel truck around, and those are the ones that put out a ton of just giant black clouds of smoke. And I think it's targeting those vehicles, which are going to be owned by smaller owner operators, is really the place where you're going to do more. You get more bang for your buck by making that easy and accessible to them.
Yeah, and they tend to have the more convoluted or complex business models. Like you mentioned, maybe they're renting a parking space, maybe they don't own the land or the truck that they're driving, maybe they work for a contractor of a subcontractor of a subcontractor. So it gets complicated when you have incentive programs that require very clean lines of accountability.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Which I think we ran into the problem where, some of the incentives in California weren't even available to, for us as have a vehicle share program where it's out there for rent. It had to be someone that is going to own and operate the truck, have a depot. And on that, really the people you're talking about are big Fortune 500 companies. And so on our side, where we're taking one truck that, goes out to, on average, we're looking at almost 3 people a week are using that vehicle. You take one vehicle now that turns into 3 and takes 3 other diesel vehicles off the road. on a shared basis. We saw that as a pretty active one, but was one that wasn't contemplated within the California grant programs out there.
Yes, actually, now I feel obligated to make a plug for HVIP. So, yes, the HVIP program typically wants folks to have vehicles for 3 years. And but we have created a set aside this year, and it's called the Innovative Small E-Fleet Program, really catered to these types of models that Jimmy and Stephen are discussing today. And so
nice.
that's new. It just opened like this month in California. So
good job. Well done, Nikki. Well,
thank you.
That's great. Good to hear.
Advocating for small fleets like I used to be and how they can get in on this electrification transformation. So that's happening and we're excited. And also HVIP standard, which you guys mentioned is usually oversubscribed so quickly. California made a truly historic investment in the program this year. And so actually there is still funding still available. So if you're in the audience and you are a California fleet, you can go to California HVIP and either request vehicles through the sort of traditional HVIP voucher process, or you can check out this new set aside for smaller fleets with different business models. Thanks, guys. You guys teed me up for a good plug there. So as we get close to wrapping up, I did want to finish with like some next steps. So maybe what markets you're thinking about next, or how you plan to scale from this first deployment. We've heard your lessons learned, your pain points, but what's good, what's working, and what do you want to do more of?
I mean, for me, I think there are really two problems when it comes to electrification. There's one is the vehicle access problem. How do contractors get access to the vehicles? And in my mind, that's solved. Our partnership with Fluid has effectively solved this problem. So now it's just working with Jimmy and his team to find the right vehicles that fit the right use cases for our different stores in Tempe, Arizona, as well as Detroit, Michigan. So we have to look at that and find the right vehicle fit. But so for me, the vehicle access problem is a big one, but I think it's largely solved. And then the infrastructure problem is the second hurdle. I feel pretty confident that we can deploy vehicles anywhere there's infrastructure, and we are in the middle of. And I think there'll be a press release pretty soon of partnering with a company to provide infrastructure at most of our IKEA stores around the country. And so that'll be huge. And once those get up and running, let's say in the next, 12 months or so, that we'll be deploying vehicles in all of those locations. And so pretty excited about that. But yeah, it's all about infrastructure and vehicle access. And then of course I'm also excited that our TSPs themselves, some of them are starting to take some initiative to offer zero emission deliveries on their own out of their own facilities and things like this, which ultimately is kind of the holy grail of this thing. We got into this zero emission delivery project, not with the goal of just IKEA being zero emission, but also to be a leader to try to move the industry in that direction. I mean, ultimately, we're all going to be driving zero emission vehicles. The question is, how fast can we solve some of these problems on the commercial side to get these folks in the mix? So when I see our TSPs start to offer zero emission deliveries, not only to us, but hopefully to their other customers as well, then that will, we will have achieved that. So trying to drag along our TSPs as well. So
yeah. No, and to that, I mean, it's exactly what Steve said. I mean, it's infrastructure, and it's that planning for what infrastructure, getting lots set up, partnering with people that have existing lots with charging, and electrifying others that don't have it, whether it be their facilities, whether it be, third-party parking areas, any of the people are building up that base infrastructure. But that's really going to be the next challenge of how do you get the charging, the base, so you have a home for the vehicle to go back to that can charge it back up and make it ready to go for the next use.
That's great. I'm going to squeeze in one last question because Elena has been so patient and asked it twice, which is, do you guys think about how clean the power is that you're getting? Do you leave that entirely to the grid, or are you looking at where you're getting the juice from?
We do hook up to the grid, which that is just because of of ease. But we do cancel our renewable energy credits to make that power renewable power. So IKEA generates more renewable power than it uses on a global basis and in the United States as well. So we use those renewable energy credits to help offset our power usage.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of look at it, I mean, the first step is getting the vehicles and migrating out the fossil fuel burning vehicles off the road, getting to that EV, and then once you start getting infrastructure set up so you have it, then you start looking at where's that power come from. I think it's something that power companies need to take that initiative, and us as companies out there using it, need to push for those mandates on how do we ensure that we're not trading out one center for another in terms of putting fossil fuels back into there.
Well, thank you. Those 45 minutes just like absolutely flew by. I don't even think we covered all of the questions that we thought up ahead of time for this session. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and not just doing this sort of like behind the magic curtain. I think everybody that's in the audience will hopefully have a few takeaways and things to think about to keep top of mind when they start their journey towards electrification. You gave me definitely some food for thought about how to design better incentives. And, we'll be checking back in, I'm sure next year. We want to hear about your next big rollout. I'm excited to see how quickly Fluid is growing and like IKEA really leading the way and pushing all of us in the industry forward. It's so important. And thank you guys so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nikki.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Bye.